Hello, finance enthusiasts. Today we're going to talk about the crisis of the 3rd century in the Roman Empire, which took place between 235 and 284 AD. This period went down in history as a complete economic disaster, marked by political chaos, rising military expenditures, a collapsing tax system, and the breakdown of social structures. We'll examine the cause and effect relationships from a financial perspective and draw lessons for modern economies. So, if you're ready, let's dive into the fall of Rome together. The crisis began in 235, when Emperor Alexander Severus was killed. Alexander had lost the army's confidence after the failed Persian campaign in 232. To cover the treasury deficit, he reduced soldiers' pay by 10%. However, the legions saw this as a betrayal, and their commanders declared Maximinus Thrax emperor, killing Alexander. Between 235 and 284, a total of 26 emperors came and went, most of them killed in assassinations or wars. This instability triggered an economic domino effect. Each emperor had to pay large bonuses called donativa to secure the throne. Ascending to the throne meant an extra cost of 10 to 20 million denarii. About 70% of Rome's annual budget, around 150 million denarii, went to military salaries. The treasury survived on taxes and borrowing. For example, in the 200s and 50s, 20 million denarii were borrowed from temple treasures. But this seriously eroded elite confidence in the government. The debt-to-GDP ratio approached roughly 50% in modern terms. Attacks by barbarian tribes like the Goths and Alemanni in the 200s and 50s required the formation of 10 additional legions, costing 50 million denarii annually, 1/4 of the treasury's revenue. In 260, Emperor Valerian was defeated and captured by Persian king Shapur at the Battle of Edessa. This closed trade routes to the east and reduced tax revenues by 20%. As a result, the treasury could not handle the burden and turned to the monetary system. Rome's monetary system was based on the silver denarius. To cover the deficit, coin production was increased, and silver content fell below 5%, causing dramatic price surges. Inflation reached 1,000%. The price of 1 modius of wheat rose from 2 denarii in 235 to 200 denarii in the 270s. The public's purchasing power was almost destroyed. The tax system also collapsed. Taxes shifted from cash to in-kind contributions like grain, as money lost value. High taxes forced a quarter of farmers to abandon their land, reducing agricultural output by 30%. For example, wheat production in Egypt fell by 40%, doubling food prices in Rome. Tax revenues dropped by 30%, since roughly 40% of Rome's income depended on agriculture, triggering further tax hikes and land abandonment. Trade also collapsed. Mediterranean trade volume fell by half, as piracy and barbarian raids made routes unsafe. Wheat shipments from Egypt dropped 40%. Merchants returned to barter instead of using the devalued denarius. Bankers and traders halted investments due to political uncertainty. For instance, shipbuilding in port cities fell by 60%. Rome's economic output, or GDP, fell by 40 to 50%. Creating a scenario combining hyperinflation and recession. The crisis also heavily affected society. The middle class eroded under taxes and inflation, while the wealthy hoarded gold and the poor went hungry. Urbanization declined. Rome's population fell from around 1 million in the 200s to 700,000 in the 270s. A quarter of rural farmland was abandoned, worsening food shortages. Cities in Anatolia partially survived by focusing on local trade, but tax revenues fell by 25%. The empire fragmented. Postumus in Gaul and Zenobia in Palmyra took advantage of the central government's inability to collect taxes and maintain security, establishing their own states. The army also rebelled due to unpaid salaries. Uprisings in Gaul reduced local tax revenues by 15%. All of this created a systemic risk. Liquidity crises, loss of confidence, and production declines combined to form a collapse cycle. Emperor Aurelian built walls to protect Rome from barbarian attacks and introduced the Antoninianus coin, but inflation persisted. The real transformation came with Diocletian in 284. He established the Tetrarchy, dividing the empire into 4 parts, making defense and administration more effective. Military expenditures fell by 10%, but bureaucracy increased by 15%. Tax reform included a census, making taxation fairer and increasing treasury revenues by 15%. However, peasants were tied to the land, creating a system similar to serfdom. In 301, the Edict on Maximum Prices set ceilings. For example, 1 modius of wheat could cost no more than 100 denarii. But supply and demand imbalances caused merchants to hoard goods, increasing food shortages by 20%. A gold aureus coin was introduced, but most of the population never saw it. These reforms saved Rome, but bureaucracy increased tax collection costs by 10%, and tying peasants to the land reduced innovation. The financial lesson is clear. Short-term fixes rarely work. Structural reforms are essential. The crisis of the 3rd century demonstrates how uncontrolled public spending, political instability, loss of confidence, and declining production can combine to devastate an economy. Rome's GDP fell by 40 to 50%, comparable to modern crises. The 2008 banking liquidity trap mirrors Rome's treasury crisis. Venezuela's hyperinflation is similar to its monetary collapse. Quantitative easing today resembles Rome's coinage expansion, though modern oversight prevents hyperinflation. Countries with debt-to-GDP ratios exceeding 100%, such as Greece in 2010, remind us of Rome's loss of confidence. Financial strategy lessons. Diversified portfolios, debt management, and safe haven assets like gold and bonds are crucial. What do you think? Could a similar crisis happen in today's world? Next week on our channel, Emperor Diocletian's price edict. Can law stop inflation? We'll dive into how Diocletian tried to control soaring prices in ancient Rome, the effects of his edict on the economy, and the lessons we can learn for modern financial systems. Don't miss it. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss next week's episode.